this?
Almost 5 years.
5 years?
Yep.
Rocking and rolling, a little of this, a little of that.
Yep.
Indication of his patience.
I'm sorry?
Indicates his patience.
Patience.
Yeah.
We do some good stuff.
Yep.
Sendgrid, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Phil. So I've been working at Intelitech for about 5 years, mostly full stack stuff. I tend to lean more towards back end development than front end development, but Intelitech you get a little bit of everything, so that's been challenging for me and fun along the way. Prior to Intelitech, I worked at Microsoft for almost 10 years and a couple other small companies in Seattle before that. So anyways, we've been using Sendgrid and for a couple of our companies and that we work for. And I just want to kind of go over basically what we use it for, what it is, and then I'll get into some actual code probably will be most of it, showing how we use it and how we use webhooks to get notification of things that happen with email after we send it. That's going to be the majority of this talk. So Sendgrid is essentially a cloud-based email platform. There's lots of other ones, and on my next slide, I think I list several of them. We picked Sendgrid based on ease of use with its APIs. There's some other ones that have some good libraries for them as well. They all function very similarly, so if you know how to do one, you probably know how to do most of them. It's got a REST API. We're not really using it that way. We're using a C# NuGet library that they have developed. Makes it a little bit simpler for us to use. Of note, they just recently merged with Twilio, which is a pretty huge company that they specialize in more phone stuff, so SMS, actual phone calls, and they even have integration with like WhatsApp and stuff like that. I was thinking about throwing some of that in here, but it turns out there's nothing really interesting about sending an SMS because once you send it, you don't get any webhook events or anything like that. It's really just sending it, so it's really just using a library. So these are some of the other ones, and there's probably another dozen of them as well. We've used Mailgun, I know, at Intelitech before, very similar to Sendgrid. The pricing might be a little bit different. Haven't used Postmark, and then Amazon has their own solution as well.
Do you know what the differences are between Mailgun and Sendgrid and why we would pick one over the other?
I'm not sure there's a good reason to pick one or the other. Sendgrid, it's probably pricing is probably, in fact, Mailgun might actually be a little bit cheaper than Sendgrid. Sendgrid used to be free for a certain number of messages, and now you get like 40,000 your first month, and then you get 100 messages per day thereafter, and so they throttle you on a day. Whereas now Mailgun, you get 40,000 a month free or something like that, or maybe more than that, 60,000 a month free regardless. So in terms of if you're not sending a lot of volume, Mailgun might actually be a better choice now. But Sendgrid's changed some of their stuff.
Functionally the same.
Functionally very similar. Yeah, and it's been admittedly a few years since I've looked at Mailgun, so I don't know if they've added functionality that Sendgrid doesn't have. Okay, so the way we're using Sendgrid, one of the clients that I'm currently working for, they need the ability to send out their end-of-month statements via email. And so we needed a way to quickly send a bunch of emails using some sort of an API. We're Azure-based, their whole application is. And so we need to be able to send out several hundred, if not 1,000 of these within, like an hour. And you can't really do that using an on-prem solution very easily. And additionally, they needed support for seeing when customers actually open their email and if they've clicked on links and that kind of stuff, because they get a lot of customers they'll call to collect their money and they'll say, I never got it. and they can say, well, you opened it and you clicked on the link to get to our website, so we know you got it, that kind of stuff. So that was important to them to have there. And then they also need a way to verify addresses that are potentially invalid that they got from their customers. So, and Sendgrid does a pretty good job with that, letting you get notifications when things are blocked or dropped or just bounce back for a bad address. So getting started with Sendgrid is a pretty straightforward process. You can go sign up for an account at sendgrid.com. I signed up for one just for this demo this week. There's really not a lot to get started. Like I said, the first month you can play around with it as much as you want, and if you're not sending high volume, 100 messages a day might be enough for a project, depending on what you're doing. For our project, it turns out it's not enough, but I think it's still only like $15 a month for up to like 100,000 messages, so it's pretty reasonable. Yeah, in fact, I say that 100,000 for that. So the next step that I would take if I was going to do this for an actual project, I haven't taken the time to do it with mine because I don't own a domain and I don't want to set it up for this demo, but authenticating your Sendgrid plan with your domain is fairly important. If you don't, there's a lot of email services that won't deliver your mail, Hotmail being one of them. They'll all bounce back and say you can't do it. So authenticating with your domain is basically setting up some CNAME records in your DNS provider that links your Sendgrid account to your domain provider, and that way they know the mail's coming from somewhere good. So Hotmail has just decided, and presumably others, that you're likely to get spam from somebody who's not authenticated with their domain, so they just block it. So setting that up, and then you go through some configuration to set up the various things that you want Sendgrid to do for you, namely webhooks. You can set up some stuff for allowing customers to unsubscribe, which I believe is a requirement that you have to put that on your emails when you send them. The other reason you probably want to authenticate with your domain is so that you don't get a bad sender reputation, which is important because that's how a lot of email providers will block your email, is if you have a poor reputation. There's websites you can go to check your reputation. But you're essentially using, with their basic plans, you're essentially using shared IP addresses. So if one of your neighbors that's using Sendgrid is using it for bad things and Sendgrid doesn't catch that could actually affect your reputation. They have plans where you can get a dedicated IP, so you don't have to worry about that, but their cheapest ones, you are sharing IP address with other people. Yeah, and then the last thing, I guess, is to start coding after you get it all configured. So the biggest integration, or the most integration that we do with Sendgrid is through webhooks. So we'll send the message, but then we're expecting to get notification of events that happen after it's sent. And you'll find this is a common pattern with tons of cloud services. We're doing the same thing for QuickBooks Online. That's the only other one that I can think of that we're using, but it's pretty standard across. DevOps has webhooks. Yeah, it's a very standard way of basically doing serverless computing between two things so that you can get notified from a big cloud service of when something of yours, an event that's relevant to you, happens. There's a good discussion of this on this link that I put up here, but we're going to go through most of it. The important thing about webhooks are a couple of important things. They're not necessarily guaranteed to be delivered, but I haven't found many cases where we don't get them at all. They're pretty reliable. You're not guaranteed to get them in order, especially if they're happening pretty quickly, because they can do whatever they want in the cloud, and they might be doing stuff on different machines, and things get out of order, so you can't rely on that necessarily. The demo that I'm going to show today, we are showing whatever the last event was, so that's maybe not a really good paradigm, because it might not have really been the last event, but we're kind of showing what the status of that is. Yeah, so a lot of what I would like to talk about is how we set up the webhooks and go through some of the code that we wrote to actually receive these webhooks. It's kind of an interesting problem, because most services that are in the cloud expect you, number one, they expect you to use HTTPS for receiving events. But more importantly, it's really difficult to debug if you're having to deploy and receive these webhooks and then deploy when you make a change. So there's some pretty good methods that we can use to actually debug webhooks on our local machine, and we'll go through some of those possibilities. So some of the tools that I've used, and there's tons of them actually, but webhook.site is really just a website, and you can go there and it will give you a unique link, and you just copy that and you can put it into whatever your webhook is, your cloud service is expecting for a webhook, and then anytime a message is sent to that address, you can go back to that webpage and you can see what came in. So that's kind of helpful, just without having to set anything up on your local machine. So you can test what the payload might be coming from a webhook, and I'll show you how that works. ngrok is what I've used to marshal stuff back to my machine. So the way this works is you fire up a command line app on your machine, and we'll go through this as well, and it will give you a unique link as well, and you would put that into your cloud provider as your webhook link, and then their service will actually marshal that stuff back to your machine and actually send the responses back through it. And so that's how I do local debugging. And I just found this pretty useful for if you have a web service that doesn't have an SDK that is available, and you need to be able to store this, serialize this stuff into JSON or deserialize it. A good way to do it is just use like webhook.site, go to a site similar to JSON to C#, put it in there, and you'll get all your classes, and you can just use them. That's
Studio lets you paste JSON.
What's that?
Well, Visual Studio also lets you paste
Does it?
JSON as a class. Like there's a right-click paste as.
Okay.
Which I didn't know.
That'd be even better.
But it's super cool.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right. So yeah, that would be even better. Okay, so for Sendgrid, a couple important details. You need to send a 200 response back, and that's all that I'm doing in my demo is sending HTTP OK back. If they don't receive it, they will use a backup algorithm to resend these messages every, it might start out like every 1 minute, and then it'll be 10 minutes, and they'll retry for up to 24 hours to get it to you. But as soon as you send them back at 200, they know that you got it, and you're good to go. Another somewhat important thing is to figure out a way to authenticate your requests. I've written a small kind of dummy method to do that in the demo that I'll show you, but the idea is that so somebody, if they know your endpoint, they can't just spam you with fake data that could, depending on what you're using the data for, could mess you up. Okay, so these are some of the events. These are actually all the events, I believe, that Sendgrid supports. And I don't need to go through all of them here. They're kind of self-explanatory. The ones that are somewhat interesting are Well, some of the bounces are interesting because there's such thing as a soft bounce and a hard bounce, and you don't really get a notification of what type of bounce it is, but you'll find stuff that sometimes bounces, and then you'll get a deliver request afterwards. And then deferred, some email providers will just say, I can't send it now, but I'm going to send it. So they will delay it, so you'll get a deferred response. And then some of the stuff that we're tracking in our application, I'll show in the demo, or the events where somebody actually opens the email, and when you click on it, and there's some important details to setting up click tracking that I'll go through. And then unsubscribe, Sendgrid actually kind of implements that for you. So if somebody unsubscribes from you, it goes into a list and you can't send mail to them anymore until you remove them from that. But presumably you would probably want to do something else than just, you'd want to do something to disable sending email to them outside of Sendgrid, but they're kind of a backup so that you don't accidentally send email to somebody who's said they don't want more email from you.
So it doesn't know that ahead of time?
What's that?
So it doesn't know, it could potentially, like, it wouldn't necessarily know if it was sending to an address that was unsubscribed? You would think it would know, like, just don't send it.
It does. That's exactly what it does. But your code, I could
Is that
still,
considered dropped? Like, that's still under the dropped category?
no, it just won't send it,
Okay.
period.
That's,
But my code that I write, I could send an email address. I could tell the API to send it to somebody who's unsubscribed, and Sendgrid will not send it. And then there's a configuration section that I'll show you in the dashboard that allows you to set up your unsubscribe in a couple ways. So you can use their default one, which just puts a link in there. You can redirect it to your own unsubscribe page if you want. And there's probably a couple other things. It's nothing I've gotten too far into detail with. Okay, so now we can just start looking. That's basically the outline of it, and now we can go through and actually configure this and run some code. So this is the dashboard. I've noticed that the email activity is a little bit delayed. You get a daily report that tells you this exact data here, but I know for a fact I've clicked on more than one link today, and it's telling me one link clicked. But most of the stuff that we want, and so there's other stuff in here too. This will show you your unsubscribes. If you wanted to set up sender authentication. Oh, sorry about that. I thought I had these set to duplicate. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Anyways, these stats, geez. It keeps going back to extending my display. Okay, these stats up here are a little bit delayed, so I wouldn't take them necessarily to heart. You'll have, if you're setting it up like I'll show you in the demo, and you're storing the events that happen, you'll have much better tracking than apparently they have on their dashboard, because these seem to be a little bit slow for some reason. And this is a good place. This dashboard is where you would go and look, and so you can find, for example, email addresses that are invalid. You can look for your bounces. You can look for drops and stuff like that. So it seems like every month for this customer that I'm working for, we have new addresses, and inevitably there's 10 or so that are wrong. And so we're actually taking those, and when we get a bounce, we're taking the webhook call that says it was a bounce, and we're actually sending an email to their office that says, hey, you need to double check this one. So this is where you set everything up. Maybe. So first thing you need to do is get an API key. So this is how you authenticate with Sendgrid so that your app can do something. And once you've stored it, it won't let you see it anymore, so you'd have to basically create a new one. So you need to write it down or copy it first thing when you do it.
Source control.
Yeah. No, I made sure I didn't do that since I put this stuff out there. But yeah, probably not source control. And so the options here, the one that I did, I did full access, so I can just do anything in there. But there's some other options here. You can customize it. You can give them ability to change your plan and stuff like that if you wanted to use webhooks for that. We're not using it for any of that. Of note, you can also, if you're set up through your domain, you can actually receive email through here as well. I'm not set up through a domain here, and we don't have a need to do it for my project, so it's not something that I've done. But you can set it up so that your domain provider can route your email back to Sendgrid, and you can do stuff with it if you want.
What would the advantage be of sending or receiving email? Like,
Automation of some sort. Somebody replies to you something, and you can essentially write code to do something based on what they write you. The sky's the limit with what you could do, right? Anything that's in the message you could use.
I'm just thinking about the use case, right? Because I want to use SendGrid for sending because I want it to handle all the whitelist, blacklist, spamming, bouncing, yada yada. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's providing all the services.
Mm-hmm.
So what service over, Gmail or Exchange or whatever, Exchange Online or whatever the heck else, right? So what service would SendGrid provide on the receiving side, I suppose, other than maybe the same programming model? Right, are there other features that it's going to provide on the receiving side?
I don't know if there's any other features, but it gives you a single endpoint in the cloud where you can receive email from anybody and do something based on that email. So that's the benefit. You could,
Yeah, so you've got
every time
a common program.
Right, every time Phil sends me an email address, put something into Salesforce so that I call him tomorrow, or
Via
stuff like that.
webhook, you're right.
Yeah,
As opposed to me hooking, my email account, my
Right.
email inbox directly.
Correct.
For that sort of thing.
correct.
Or doing any of the workflow type emailing.
Yep.
things.
Yeah, so there's other options, but it is something you can do with SendGrid that I haven't really played around with. So a lot of the stuff that we care about is actually in the mail settings, and this is where we set up the event notification, and I'll show you how this goes. So you can select which items you get notified for via webhook, and I just have them all selected so we can kind of test those out. This is where you put your URL. Interestingly, they don't require HTTPS here. I know that QuickBooks does require HTTPS. That's where you set that up there. And then this is where you would set up your sender authentication. I don't need to go through that. It's not very difficult. There's documentation that tells you you just have to add records to your DNS. And then tracking is the other part that is relevant to us. So you can set up click tracking, which we have turned on. So if you put links in your email and somebody clicks on it, it will send you a webhook event that tells you what they clicked on. And there's a couple of caveats to that I'll go through. You have to have your link set up in a certain way or it won't do that. And then open tracking is the same thing. So it'll let you know when they did that. So as far as code goes, I've written using Coalesce, which is a IntelliTech tool for rapidly building websites in ASP.NET Core. And so I've just created a really basic one here that stores email messages and email message events. And I added SMS. There's nothing in there because I decided not to do that when I found out it wasn't that interesting. And then application user is also irrelevant for what we're doing. So to get this configured, we need to first set up a way to receive our webhooks. First, I'll show you the What was the first site? What was it? Webhook.site. So you can see here, I get a unique link here. And I just want to copy that. And by the way, they have some other services that work similar to ngrok. You have to pay for them. And I'll show you what ngrok does next. If I go back here to Sendgrid, and I go to my, sorry, wrong click. If I go to my webhook settings, mail settings, event notification, and I edit this address right here. Actually, I'm going to copy this one first. I'll just store that there, just because I want to make sure that I get my right endpoint back when I go to show the rest of the demo. So if I put that in there, and then I can just say test my integration. I don't know if that actually worked, but we'll find out. I should be able to go back here. Yeah, and you can see here I got a post. I actually got 2 posts. So I don't know if I clicked it twice or I'm not sure what happened. But this shows you the JSON of the events, the webhooks that are sent back. So this one is for process. A lot of them share a lot of the same data, and then there's some that have more data than others. So this is a good way that you can get an idea of what the payload looks like if you don't have an SDK that will parse it. And it turns out I didn't find in their SDK, it might actually be there. I didn't find an event. I didn't find a class that actually encapsulates all of this JSON. So I wrote my own using the JSON to C#. Next time I'll paste it into Visual Studio and let it do it for me.
So that, just to be clear, that was a post from Sendgrid to you that included what, an array of
Correct.
Events?
Yep, and that's what you always get from them as an array, and you'll see that in our code. So
it batches them up and
it batches them up.
sends them
Yep.
to you periodically, whatever.
Yep, they're usually pretty quick, but I've seen sometimes where they don't show up right away.
Post just because you had so many email addresses that taken up the post.
Do they serialize, I guess?
Potentially, it looks like. Let's see, what time is it? 6:30. So this. Yeah, I'm not sure actually. Well, it's UTC time. So yeah, I'm not sure why I have to. Maybe it gave me the same link as last time I opened this site. I'm not sure. In the one I've been old.
You've got, so
I mean, we
you've
can
got,
try it.
you've got to respond with the 200. So what about response time, right? I mean, how long do you have to respond?
That's a
Is there
good
a
question.
timeout?
I don't actually know. I presume there is a timeout, but I didn't see that in the
30
documentation.
seconds or, standard
Probably.
type web time to live.
Yeah, or it might not even be relevant, but it's possible that you might get a duplicate event if you don't send it back.
Yeah.
But as soon as they get it back, then they'll stop sending you
Yeah, but I guess
new events.
from a design perspective, you wouldn't want to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? Just
Right.
take the message and
Correct.
stash it somewhere and then maybe process it later or whatever.
Probably, yeah. In our code, it's not doing much. It's actually looking up we're storing the message, and then we're looking up that message by parsing out the data that comes in the webhook, and then going back. So that's one way that you can see this stuff. ngrok would be the other way, and that's my preferred way because then we'll be able to actually step through in the debugger and see what it's actually doing. So the command line for ngrok is that. It takes this would be this is where I'm actually running here. You can see localhost 44.638. And so if I fire this up, it's going to give me a link here. And it'll give me an HTTPS and an HTTP link. And they have paid subscriptions where you can get a fixed link. The way I'm using it, you get a new link every time you run it. So that means you got to go change your your settings every time you run it, which isn't super difficult. So we can go in here, and again, we can edit that, and I'll copy my, and this I'll show you goes directly to my controller in my website, is why that's there. And I can test this as well. And we'll actually see this come through on ngrok. And we got a 401 unauthorized, and that's because of my code. And I'll show you where that is. Right now I have it set so that when I send an email, I put a key in there. And right now it's nothing. It's just a string. And if you don't have that key, we're not going to accept the request from you. So that's kind of some really basic authentication to make sure it came from them. And since they don't know what my key is, they can't send it when they're testing it. Okay, so there's that. So now we can actually, oh, and there's another interesting thing, and that is they give you a web UI if you want to see more detailed stuff. So webhook site that we're just at. And because that was just a test of my link, it's not gonna try to send it again. Okay, so the code of actually sending an email. It is in, if I can get this to be bigger so we can see it. It's actually in, sorry about that. It's actually in here, so we can set a breakpoint in the location where we actually send it. And then we can set a breakpoint, and then all the webhooks come into the location that we put in the site, and they come in to webhook controller, and they will come into here, Sendgrid webhook. So if I go in here, we can go through and show how we actually send one using the API. It's really simple to do. So I can say send email, and I'll send it to a test account. By the way, Outlook.com doesn't seem to block everything, and it doesn't seem to block for every address, but we found plenty when we didn't have authentication set up for the project I'm working at where we just bounced until we got it set up. So I don't know what their algorithm is for that. Okay, so if I hit send here, we'll get into our breakpoint. And email message is a class in my database that we set up, and it is pretty basic. It basically takes a message ID and who it's to, the text and a subject, and then we have a corresponding table for each event that we get, and we'll be storing into here, and that just basically links the message ID along with the time that the webhook came in, the event, so that would be processed, delivered, bounced, click, open. The Sendgrid event ID, that's just a unique ID that comes with the event. We're just storing it for no real reason. And then a couple other fields here. We're definitely not storing everything that comes in. There's probably, depending on what we're using it for, there's other pertinent data there. So to send one, this is actually the code right here. We do a Sendgrid client, which is part of their SDK, and you pass in the API key that you got from the dashboard, and you create a new Sendgrid message. This is the part where I'm adding authentication. So you can actually pass in any key value pair that you want, and that will get stored with the message, and it will come through on every webhook event, which is handy. So I could see you doing something here like maybe you get the message ID and then you encrypt it and send that here, or you put something unique And then on the other side, when you're processing the webhook, you decrypt that using a public key and make sure they match. And then you're in business. That's a good way to keep people from doing stuff they shouldn't be doing by spamming you. And then this simply sends or splits out comma or semicolon delimited email addresses. One thing to note that we found is for some of the webhook events, if you're sending an email to 5 email addresses, you don't necessarily get back which one of those email addresses did the open on the email or the click, which is kind of a bummer because we've had cases where a customer said they didn't get email, but we saw that they'd opened it, but it turns out it was somebody else that we sent the email to that was on the to line. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, and then we're gonna send it. That's it. This is it. This sends it. We get a response back. I'm not sure what's actually in here, but it'll give you a server. So we already got a webhook. So we broke into this other part here, and we actually got 2 events in our webhook. One of them is processed. That means that they got the message and they did their thing to send it. And then we got a delivered. So this should already be in my inbox. And there it is in my inbox. So what we're doing here then is simply for this webhook, and it looks like I already got another webhook, which is interesting. Oh, it's probably because I'm broken in the debugger and it probably resent it again because I haven't responded to it. So this is basically where we check the authentication signature. So you can see this is the string that I put in before. So in this case here, we're saying we send unauthorized if we're not set to authentication signature. In this case, we're going to match it because that's what my code is checking. That's why we got the 401 unauthorized when we sent the test message before. We're going to get the... So this is back, this is kind of weird bouncing through because I have breakpoint set in both apps, or both sides of the app. So this here is just storing the email message that we created into our database and sending an initial event that says, we called the API. So that's our very first event every single time. And so I'm just going to let that go. Now this is back on the webhook side here. We get the message ID. So the message ID, you can see actually has a bunch of other data at the end of it. What we want is actually everything before this dot. That's actually the message ID. And that's what we key off of. And then we look up that email message, which we should, gotta get rid of some of these other breakpoints because we're getting too many calls here at once. We look up the message that we stored in our database, which is this. You can see that message ID matches this message ID. And so we get the email message, and if for some reason we don't have it in our database, we're going to send an error, so they resend it to us again. So this would be the case where, for some reason, we sent the email, but our database was slow inserting, and we don't have the record stored yet we already got a webhook. So we want to send them an error back and say, hey, send this again, so we get it at the right time. And then we'll add a new event, and we can just let this run, and we will see all the events that come in here. And so you can see we have 5 of them here. And because these came in out of order, I'm showing the last status here. And mostly because we had breakpoint set, these came in the wrong way. But you can see we got delivered 3 times because I didn't respond in time. So that kind of answers Phil's question from before. They will send it again if you don't get back to them. I opened it apparently once. And this was the one that we started in there, so that didn't originate from Sendgrid. So we can do one we can do one more and see it go through and this should actually go through. Okay, there are no breakpoints. But you can see our webhook calls coming in here. We can see them coming in here as well. So I'm going to guess that we already have, we got a delivered event from there. As soon as I go and actually view that, we should, within a short amount of time, get another call that says it. So that's the basics of how we do it. I'll show you how we do link tracking, because that's somewhat interesting. There's a couple of caveats to that, like I mentioned. So the important thing for links, they need to be HTML links. So basically an A tag with an href set, and they have to contain HTTP or HTTPS. If you just put in like intellitech.com, it's going to come through as intellitech.com. But if you put it in, I've got a link here that I stored here that we can do. And so if I go back to here, there we got my open here. And these are UTC time on the main page here. When it shows our last event, it'll show Pacific time. So that's just basically the timestamp that they send you back as a Unix epoch timestamp. So you need to just convert that to a date time to use it. So if I want to send email with a link, so I'll put that in here, and you can see this is, my first one is intellitech.com, and you'll see that that doesn't support link tracking. My second link that I put in the email is https intellitech.com, and that will support link tracking. So we'll send that. And here it is right here, and you can kind of see by here. So link tracking, you can see here the link says intellitech.com. And this one here gives a really long string that they're going to use to track that we actually clicked on it. And then, so you essentially go to their website and they redirect you. They do have ways that you can white label these so that they will use your domain, so people don't know that you're doing this. I don't have that set up in this demo account. But this could actually look like an intellitech.com link if I wanted it to, or whatever my domain is.
From intellitech.com or something, or a tag in intellitech.com. How would it do that?
I'm not sure actually.
They could-
It might use a short. I don't know. I haven't actually done it. It might use a short URL string or something.
They're gonna expect you to forward the traffic.
That's what I would think, right? That you'd
Yeah,
put-
I'm not entirely
like
sure how that
Either way,
works.
that's not
You'd
very
put some JS or something.
It may not be the full straightforward link, but it's going to look more like your link, I guess, is the thing.
This is
At the end of the
really,
day, if
this
it's
is
actually
really
gonna be
intellitech.com.
something,
Yeah,
then
it's
we're gonna have to.
right. It's probably not that. So
But we could do a redirect to it and then use the rest of the data to go into them. They
Yeah,
probably
for-
require you to set up a redirect.
that is actually possibly the way it works. I've never set it up, but I know it's an option that you can do.
Yeah.
Do you know how the image works with that they use to determine if somebody opened it? Is that just like
It's just a hit.
a certain
It's a hidden
server
image. Yep.
records it like
Yep.
with that host?
Exactly.
As soon as you're into the HTML, it's gonna hit it.
Yep.
That's
But
standard.
does that have to be, does the image have to have some kind of code appended to it? Or
No, it's
It's
probably
not gonna be the same image for, at least it's not the same link for
it's probably in here.
that in there.
The way
I
they do
can't-
it is they give you a different image.
I thought I
link
could
for every image when it renders, they know you are. there's also tools you can install, like in Gmail or whatever, that don't allow tracking from you. Not that I would have those installed.
Well, if it's anything like Chrome, they'll probably take them out.
Says the
Remove
guy
the
who
ability
sends a
to do it.
newsletter out to his customers and wants to track what they click links on.
So that's really it. So we can see my new one here, my link test here. We've gotten process delivered. I opened it twice. If I click on this link, it's going to open that, and I will get that back in
Yeah, that website looks pretty nice.
ngrok here at some point. I don't know if it already came.
Sorry, Eric.
I think it was pretty good. Especially from the guy who's responsible.
Get out of town. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. The link tracking is apparently a little bit delayed. I haven't gotten the event yet, but it will eventually come through and web service. And the only interesting thing about that is you'll actually get a URL in the response so that it tells you which link they clicked. So if you have 10 links in there, you can tell which one they did. So that's really it. Questions, comments?
So if they keep clicking a link in that email, is it going to tell you every single time?
It will tell you every single time. So you can,
Referencing back to it for some reason.
yep, you can tell how many times they opened it.
They have throttling in case you're like.
I don't know about that actually.
I bet they do.
They might. Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
So is there metrics? So that, I could see the obvious use here is you are doing something like, probably tracking in the case of a link, right? Do they have tracking built in as well or not?
Tracking so that you can.
Link tracking and et cetera.
So they do have some extra services that I'm not that familiar with, but you can do ad campaigns and such, so that you can set it up through their web UI. You don't have to write code at all. But you can send
Yeah.
stuff out and track that way.
Right,
We're
so the
using
use
it for a
case
different
here-
purpose.
The use case here again, obviously is custom development, right? You got a
Yep.
custom site or whatever. We use MailChimp, right, to send our newsletters out.
Right.
Link tracking and all that sort of stuff. We don't have to write any code, right?
Right.
Not that we couldn't, but, there's a service that does it. If we were doing a
Right.
custom website, like sending invoices out or whatever, different story.
Yep. Agreed. That is the use for this. If you want to do something custom based on email.
Yeah, I sent, 1,000 invoices, and I can see that 998 of them were opened.
Yep.
Okay, 2 are not opened, I better follow up with those people.
Yep. And that's exactly how our customers using it. They find out who hasn't paid at the end of the month, and then they first go and look and see, well, did they get the email? Yeah, they got it. So now I'm going to call them and say, what's up? And if they didn't get it, I'm going to call them and say, what's your email address? Because we have it wrong.
As opposed to proactively, you haven't opened your email yet. You're aware you have it.
Right. They might do that too. I don't know exactly their process, I guess, but I gave them the tools to do what they want with it.
Depending on how big the invoice is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, so that's it. And a lot of these, like I said, a lot of these webhook methods that I'm using for this, they're handy in other cloud platforms as well, because inevitably you need to be able to debug locally, and unfortunately when their service resides in the cloud, you have to have a way to get stuff back to your machine so that you can do that.
The ngrok is proxying, that's a proxy, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So this, the address that they give you is on their
Right.
domain, and that proxies it. When I started this up, it linked my machine with their website, and it proxies it back to us.
Yep. Relays the call through.
So there's my click, and you can see intellitech.com. Interestingly, you can see I got a couple of 417 expectation failed, so that's the case where I didn't have the message stored in my database, and that's probably ones that I sent earlier when I was writing this demo and never sent a 200 back. And so Those are going to keep coming through for the next 24 hours until they give up.
Cool.
All right, that's it.